TAFS is leading the charge to make the 2024 Broker Carrier Summit possible, and we are so excited to have their support. In case you haven't heard, TAFS offers much more than freight factoring. It provides a comprehensive support system for trucking companies of all sizes, specializing in fast and efficient invoice factoring with the ability to pay carriers in as little as 1 hour. And TAFS services go well beyond factoring, offering a fuel card that unlocks major fuel discounts, flexible business loans that are designed to cater to the distinct needs of a carrier's operations, a dedicated, responsive client experience team, and much more. Black Box Logistics is a 3PL freight brokerage based out of Birmingham. Alabama. Black Box Logistics was formed in 2020 by 3 friends, Logan Dyer, William Graves, and Will Hopkins, in a basement office with the goal of bringing transparency around the clock communication and hassle-free customer experience to the table. LoadBase is a logistics software solution that simplifies the process of tracking carriers. Multi-service fuel card, the industry's first fuel card, was created by an over-the-road truck driver in 1978 to offer a safe, simple, and cost-effective way to handle fuel and trucking expenses. Initially, it addressed safety concerns of carrying cash on the road. Today, it combats advanced fraud with best-in-class technical and personal support. Sales-CRM is built for freight broker and agent sales teams. Manage your shipper prospecting and follow-ups. Organize your carriers in the lanes they run. HD Ships is a leading logistics provider specializing in sustainable and tech-driven freight solutions. With hubs in Reno, Phoenix, and London, we deliver comprehensive services, including full truckload, expedited cross-border, and intermodal freight. Leveraging proprietary technology, we offer 24/7 tracking, real-time visibility, and advanced automation to ensure safe, compliant, and efficient transportation. Our commitment to sustainability enables clients to offset emissions through carbon credits, aligning logistics with environmental goals. At HD Ships, we prioritize transparency, reliability, and exceptional customer service, empowering clients to achieve seamless, sustainable logistics solutions worldwide.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Where are you joining us from today?
Miami. Hopefully the background is a hotel room, so nothing exciting, but I'm having fun down here.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'm excited for today. I know we were just talking a little bit backstage with Greg. It's going to be a fun episode as always.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, shout out to our sponsors. I can't believe I didn't know this, especially considering how long Multi-Service has been our sponsor. I mean, I knew they've been around since 1978, but the very first fuel card, that's pretty cool. Great people over there, Jessica, Patricia, I met them in person. Know several drivers who enjoy their fuel card, and yeah, we're thankful to have them as a sponsor. Black Box Logistics, obviously, where Will's company, Birmingham. Load Base, our newest sponsor. Stan over there is a great guy. They got a great tracking system. Will and I have checked it out. If you're looking at tracking options, definitely hit up Stan and talk to him. Great individual. HD Ships, where I recruit agents for. I'll let Will hop in with Sales Dash, but obviously I'm a big fan of Sales Dash. I've known Josh for a while. They were our very first sponsor. They're now a customer. Will's now a customer of them, his brokerage. But yeah, I'll let Will hop into that one.
Yeah, Sales Dash is a freight centric CRM. So a lot of the other players out there say Salesforce, you got to come in and build it out. Josh, the founder, he came with a freight background, so it comes equipped with everything that you need. So Josh became a sponsor, and then one day Matt asked me, why don't you talk to him about Sales Dash? What are you using? We were actually on Excel at the time. We onboard and all my people love it. It's definitely made our sales much easier and clean and neat, much easier to track. And then we've got our banner sponsor, TAFs. If you guys are in the market for a factoring company or just want to learn more about how all that good stuff works, we're kind of running a promo on the Two Dogs page, kind of a 13-step process for trucking. So lots of educational content, good guys over there.
Yeah, hit up Rob or Ryan if you're looking for factoring. Great company, great people. We're pretty Kansas City heavy, Midwest and South in terms of our sponsors. I think only one we have on the West Coast is, I shouldn't say we're heavy on the West Coast too. I mean, we have HD Ships and Load Base, but
kind of all over the place.
Yeah, all over the place, except the East Coast. We don't really have any sponsors on the East Coast.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Well, awesome. Well, let's get into it. Episode 34, Greg Reed. I'm looking forward to it. Let's go ahead and bring him out on the stage.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you on.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I hope I don't ruin the show for you, and looking forward to having a good time.
I was talking to Will. It was kind of cool earlier that we were talking. You got to speak at the Bitfreighter event, and I talked to someone who heard you speak too, and I know there's a couple people that are really excited to have you on. But I guess for people who don't know you, who are tuning in, you want to just give us kind of a brief background of kind of where you've been, what you were doing, what you're doing now, and just introduce yourself to everyone out there.
Yeah, sure. It's my pleasure. So today I'm the executive director of the National Star Route Mail Contractors Association. That's a heck of a name. Even the acronym NSRMCA is long, but it's a long way of saying the United States Postal Service's Surface Transportation Network. Yeah, the best kept secret in transportation, maybe up until recently, maybe up until the last 3 years, was that the Postal Service contracts out 99.9% of the transportation that moves mail and packages between postal facilities, sortation, processing centers, all the way down to that final post office. It's only at that time, that sort of final mile time, when the Postal Service takes over and owns its network, delivering to the mailbox of 170 million businesses and homes throughout the nation, 6 days a week. So I help represent the companies that comprise that surface transportation network. The association's been around since 1935. Next year in 2025, Contractors will be celebrating 180 years in supporting the Postal Service, just as the Postal Service will be celebrating its 250th anniversary, since it just predates the founding of this nation. Prior to becoming the executive director, I was a transportation attorney, and before that, just an attorney. So I've been working on transportation issues for quite a while. It was a real godsend for me to find an area, an industry of practice where you felt like you could make a real practical difference to the everyday lives of Americans. I think as the COVID pandemic reminded us, or informed a lot of Americans out there, nothing happens without transportation. In particular, nothing happens without on-the-ground logistics and trucking. They make the world turn. They make this nation turn. And so I get a real kick out of representing companies, advocating for their interests, helping them forecast the future, and today, helping them to manage and grow that unique relationship with the United States Postal Service, which in itself is serving the American people.
Now, Yeah, I mean that's a big job. How did you get into that job from I think you said you were a transportation lawyer previously, doing work with OOIDA. Oh, how did you find this that job from being an attorney to working with the post office?
Yeah, truthfully, Matt, they tricked me. They didn't tell me what I was getting into. And there's a lot of false promises on a bait and switching, and 3.5 years later, I'm trapped. No, the reality is that I got into transportation law kind of on a whim. And I think that's kind of interesting, right? Because a lot of people get into transportation on a whim, right? They don't really forecast it. They don't really think about it. And then suddenly they find themselves in it. I think that's changing a lot, right? Because we do see universities and colleges building out logistics curricula and what have you. And people are looking to the logistics world in particular as an exciting area of professional growth. But I mean, historically, if your parents weren't in it, right, you weren't in it. So I got into the transportation law a little bit on a whim after being a constitutional litigator, regulatory attorney. And I was really enjoying that work, being outside counsel to OOIDA or OOIDA, working on small trucking company issues, working on owner-operator issues. And a colleague of mine came to me and said, listen, this association that's been around forever, it's one of the oldest trucking/transportation associations in the nation. Their longstanding executive director's leaving. Would you have any interest? The short answer was no. Right? I like what I'm doing, and I don't know what on earth this is. Right? The more I looked into it, the more exciting it got. Right? Because of what they do, and because how significant their role is, and yet how unknown these companies are. So much of this surface transportation network, which today is about a $5 billion spend from the Postal Service, last year and years prior is about a $6 billion spend. That makes the Postal Service the largest buyer of transportation in the nation, bar none. No one buys transportation like the Postal Service does, and that's because they have to deliver to 170 million homes and businesses every day, 6 days a week. That universal service obligation means that they are in every corner of the country, including Guam, right? Including the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, including Alaska. And so, this incredible network, and it's comprised of every type of transportation company you could imagine. You have your mom and pop operations operating in quiet and slow corners of the country, but providing invaluable service to the people who live there so they can get their Social Security checks, they can get their medication, they get their cards from their kids, right? Which is probably underappreciated about how valuable it is when you get that letter in the mail, right? You get that card in the mail, it'll touch your heart in a way in which nothing else does. To multi-generational family businesses, right, that have built something over time. They've achieved the American dream. To today, some of the nation's largest and most sophisticated logistics, brokerage, and interstate motor carrier companies. And once I realized what all that, who all these companies are, it became an incredible opportunity to add real value to their businesses, to their future success, but also then to add real value to the American people. And by supporting these companies, supporting the Postal Service, by supporting the Postal Service and these companies, supporting the people of this country who count on this very unique promise that we will connect you every day of the week with a federal agency effectively servicing you and providing you that sort of fabric to our nation.
100%. Yeah, it's very cool. Not to backtrack, but I like that you touched on historically, right? If your family's not in transportation, you're most likely not going to be in transportation, which is ironic, right? When I hear you speak about just the Postal Service and how $5 billion spent and how much money and nothing moves without transportation, right? So it's almost ironic that it's not a bigger push for people to pursue a career in logistics. So going into kind of your network, I'm ignorant to it, right? So the first time I'd really thought about it was when I heard you speak at Bitfreighter, but I'd imagine, do you guys just have all these contracted lanes that are just running, 365? Is there any spot opportunities, or is it more kind of like dialed in?
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. And And we should definitely talk about careers in transportation, because I think it's so exciting. But when we look at the Postal Service network, it has undergone incredible change over the last 3.5 years in particular, although it feels like over that last 3.5 years, every year the change has gotten faster and more dramatic. And so let's do a little bit. I'll try. Listen, I'm from Northern New Jersey, so I can talk for the full length of the show, and neither of you two can say a word. Right. So I'm going to try to be concise. I'm not going to try to ramble too much, but let's do like a little bit of a history lesson. So the Postal Service has what is called a universal service obligation. It has to serve every home in America the same, regardless of where it's located. So you could be in the middle of Idaho on the top of a mountain, or you could be, on Fifth Ave in New York City, and you're supposed to get the same service. Right. So that means that you constantly have to advance the mail throughout the nation. And what that looked like historically was sometimes what I refer to, both in a positive and in a negative way, a set it and forget it model. The Postal Service operated on 4-year contracts. Those contracts were set schedules. Now, there were extras and detours, deviations at times, but they were these set 4-year contracts. And you ran trucks 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even though you don't get mail on Sunday, mail has to move in order to make it to destination on Monday. They have that equal service standard between the mountaintop of Idaho, right, or Fifth Ave in New York City. So that meant that Postal Service, if you will, was exceptional. But that doesn't mean that Postal Service efficiency was great, right? Because you had to run a truck, whether it had one envelope in it or it had 20 boxes or 100 boxes, because you had an obligation to move the mail. When the current Postmaster General came into his position, Louis DeJoy, he came to that position with two defining features of the opportunity and who he is. First of all, he came from a logistics background. His family had a company called New Breed Logistics. His father ran it. Louis took it over. I think, I don't want to speak out of turn. I think the narrative was he really saved the company. New Breed Logistics was then purchased by XPO. And then Louis was an executive at XPO. So he understands data, technology, efficiency, transportation, right? He comes into this position as the Postmaster General. The Postal Service, over the 10 years, looking into the future, was going to lose something like $180 billion because it had found itself in a really precarious spot. And I won't go into the details right now, but I'm happy to break it down for you if you like, where it went from being an entity that sort of printed money, was highly lucrative, highly successful in the 90s into the early 2000s to an entity that was running year-over-year deficits. And the unique thing about the Postal Service is that it has to self-finance. So unlike any other federal agency that gets a government or congressional appropriation, the Postal Service has to be self-sustaining. So it's sort of this quasi non-governmental entity in that regard. And so Postmaster General DeJoy then embarks on this incredible radical transformation of the postal network, trying to incorporate in a lot of the best practices, a lot of the cutting edge practices that we see in transportation today, like logistics, like spot market opportunities, right? So today, what that looks like, kind of very simply, is that there's two big buckets. You have your spot market opportunities. The Postal Service calls it the Freight Auction Board. It's a proprietary spot board that they call transportation as needed. They also do some extended contracting through that. And then they have their dedicated pool. So if we look at that $5 billion annual spend on transportation, about $1 billion of it runs through the spot market. And that's mostly serviced by logistics or brokerage companies, asset light, no asset companies, although there are some asset companies on the board. And then you have about $4 billion in the dedicated bucket. And that ranges from long haul contracts, 300 miles or more, interstate, cross country, interregion, what have you, to also kind of local intrastate, 300 miles or less contracts that are kind of running down to those local post offices around the nation. That's the simplistic view. There's lots of little wrinkles, and the evolution and modernization continues at a rapid pace. And I'm happy to kind of break all those down. But that's where we stand today. So we went from a set it and forget it model, where we ran trucks all the time, but sometimes not full, right? But service was reliable because of that continual run of trucks, to today where the Postal Service is trying to be a lot more dynamic, trying to be a lot more responsive to volume, trying to be a lot more cost conscious given the deficit situation that it's facing, financial situation it's facing, and also a lot more effective, right? Because how do you service the mountaintop of Idaho and New York City the same, right? You have to be an extraordinary operator in order to achieve that goal.
Yeah. So just curious. So you say you have to serve every home the same. What about way out in Alaska in the middle of nowhere? Does it still apply?
Same. So that's the best part. Postal Service mailing, if you will, is the best deal in the world. I could put a stamp. I'm here in Northern Virginia, right? Matt could put a stamp on an envelope in Miami. I was wondering why your background looks so familiar, Matt. I was like, have we been to the same place? And I think we probably have, right? So you're in a hotel. I've been there too. And Matt could send his to Alaska for the same price that you could send an envelope from Oregon or from Seattle, right? And it has to reach there in the same service window as it would reach Matt sending an envelope down the street, all for the same price. That's part of the financial challenge, because sending a letter to Alaska actually costs $35, right? And sending a letter down the street from where Matt is currently costs 5 cents, to exaggerate. But no matter where you are, you get the mail between 5 to 7 days. That's basically the standard today. So,
I mean, just curious on it. So when you talk about these financial hurdles, have you guys ever explored changing the pricing system?
So it's two things. So I want to make sure that, I support the Postal Service, right? But I don't sit within its four walls, right? So what my ideas are not necessarily postal ideas. I don't want to speak on behalf of my postal colleagues. But the Postal Service does explore changing the financial model. Here's the rub. And people are getting like a deep dose of Postal Service regulations and history here. Even my members of NSRMCA don't get this from me often. Here's the rub. So the Postal Service not only binds the nation in an historic and unique way, it also has a unique superpower, if you will. It has a unique component of it, and that it has monopoly on your mailbox. Nobody else can put anything into your mailbox. And I think we kind of overlook that, because maybe the kid down the street puts a flyer in for like a babysitting job, or the landscaper that drives through your neighborhood puts a flyer in. And we take for granted that is postal owned. Right? If you walk your neighborhood, I mean, depending on how old your neighborhood is, right, you might run across mailboxes, because I did this recently, that on the cover of the mailbox will be a stamp, and it will say U.S. mail approved by the Postmaster General. And that is a product, if you will, incorporated into mailboxes because he owns that space. You didn't realize this, but the Postmaster General has real estate on your real estate, right? And that's that mailbox. So because that's a monopoly, though, the government implemented a regulatory body. It's called the Postal Regulatory Commission, which controls how much the Postal Service can raise rates at any given time and kind of how frequently. And so today, I think the Postmaster General would argue that it is unfair to the Postal Service, unfair to the American people at some level, because ultimately they would have to finance a Postal Service that needs additional financial support, to charge the same thing for sending something to Alaska or servicing Alaska at the same service standard as it is to service people in Miami, for example. But it also is probably also fair at the same time to say we can't punish American citizens who are living in Alaska and say, sorry, you don't get as much mail, right? Because you don't get as much service, or we're going to charge you a whole lot more to send something from Alaska over to Miami because you're living in a state of the union, right? So it's a real push-pull scenario. Like, what's the right way to manage this while giving everyone the same rights, if you will, like the same access to government services. In the meantime, it's contractors that are making it happen. I mean, if you go back in time, there's these great pictures of these Postal Service transportation contractors, and they've got snowshoes on their boots, right? They like drive around in their Jeep with a chainsaw in the back of their truck, because when trees fell over roadways in more rural parts of the country years back, they didn't just turn around. They got out the chainsaw and, go through the tree, clear the road, and move on, because they embraced the same mantra that we've heard growing up, which is like neither sleet nor snow, nor wind nor rain will stop the U.S. mail from being delivered. Well, these contractors lived and breathed it every day. They reached the farthest corners of the country. They were on, they're on boats. They're in trucks going off-roading. They're in snowshoes to make sure no matter who you are and where you live, you get your mail.
Yeah, that's inspiring. So how would one go about if they wanted to get involved in the Postal Service as a contractor involved in the transportation? What would be their best route for entry?
I don't know. Do we have another hour? Can we extend this podcast? Listen, I think it's one of the greatest things that one can do in transportation, both because of what you're doing and who you're serving, but also because the Postal Service can be an incredible client, incredible customer around which to build a business. And that's when I refer back to the multi-generational family businesses, some small, some very large, that are serving the Postal Service today. It's because the Postal Service was such a great customer and client to work with. That being said, it's really hard to break into. Some of that's due to changes in the way the Postal Service is operating today. But a lot of it is because, the Postal Service, has only recently opened itself up to the larger transportation world. For a long time, I would characterize the Postal Service contractor surface transportation network as a closed network, right? If you were in, you were in. They weren't really interested in getting new suppliers. So there wasn't a streamlined or transparent or accountable onboarding process. And we're only 3.5 years into 180 years of this experience of using contractors in a new way, right? And so I think that onboarding process is still changing and still adapting. The other thing to mention just quickly is that the rigors of servicing the Postal Service is fundamentally different than kind of any other customer. I mean, there might be some comparables here and there, but the standards are different, and the sort of liabilities, if you will, are different. But if you want to get involved, there are certain processes within the Postal Service that you can pursue. But then even once you're technically onboarded, right, actually getting access to or seeing opportunities is a whole secondary step. And it can take a lot of groundwork in building relationships with people within the Postal Service so that they come to trust you. Again, because the risk or the liability is high, right? So it's not just anyone should be moving the mail or packages, both in terms of what you're moving, but also what's in that mail and packages, but also what you're moving, because mail is federally protected property. That's why if you take mail out of somebody else's mailbox, like, you can go to jail for 5 years. Right? This is not just, if it's not, and I say this kind of silly, it's kind of silly to say this, it's not just a package on your doorstep. Like, that's theft, but you don't go to jail for 5 years, right? For picking up one package off someone's doorstep. You go into someone's mailbox and take a catalog they don't want, and you can go to jail for 5 years. That's federally protected property. And that's a big part of why the association exists, right? We're here to help transportation suppliers get into the network and then be successful once they're in the network. And we don't play gatekeeper, right? But we also do have expectations because of what we're doing and who we're doing it for.
How does that work? You brought up some great points there. I mean, fraud is a big topic, in the industry right now. And we just, talked about how important, how different the, post office is. Has that kind of changed, in the last couple of years with just the amount of fraud in this industry, and kind of how have you had to deal with that or address that? Or I'm sure that's had something to do with probably, onboarding carriers and having to be extra cautious. You want to just maybe touch on, fraud in general and how it relates to your business?
Yeah, I think this is such an important issue. Obviously, it's a scourge on the commercial freight world, right? And in general transportation. And unfortunately, I think, it has visited the Postal Service as well, right? And we see that both at the local level. There's news stories at least once a month, unfortunately, about a local letter carrier kind of being robbed, or they're. Have I lost you guys? Oh, there you're back. Okay. Like a local letter carrier being robbed, about someone tampering with the mail. And now as you go upstream, right, you have sort of supply chain security issues. I made this comment early on when I first came into this position about 3.5 years ago. I believe that the Postal Service needs to modernize. I believe that it needs to take the best practices from the commercial freight world and transportation, incorporate it into their operations because of the scope of their reach and the mandate that they have. But if you're going to take the best practices from the commercial freight world, you're also going to take some of the trouble that comes with it, right? And I think we've seen some of that, right? Some fraud, some bad actors entering into the network that normally would not have a chance in hell, right, for moving the mail. But as the Postal Service moves so rapidly to address some of their financial constraints, like some issues arose. So today, that sort of vetting process is much more rigorous than it was. And I think, frankly, there could be a lot more progress still to be made on that front. But that's not just it's not just a mail issue, right? It's a transportation issue. And, I know Will's got black box logistics, right? But I think the problem is today when I talk to good actors, good companies, is that it's too easy to become a logistics company. It's too easy to get an MC number, right? And so that's where you see this proliferation of, fly-by-night operations, or companies constantly changing how they're operating to avoid sort of the accountability and scrutiny. When they're uncovered to be a bad actor here, they kind of move over there. And so this is not a postal problem, right? It's an industry level problem. And until the FMCSA kind of gets serious, until Congress gets serious about it, it's continued to be a problem. But I do say that with an acknowledgement that, opening a transportation company, whether it's an asset-based company or a logistics company, is a pathway to the American dream. And I'm a huge advocate for entrepreneurs. I started my legal career suing the government at the state and federal level because they were creating undue, arbitrary, and anti-competitive burdens on new entrepreneurs, protecting those already in, keeping those who want to get in out, right? So I abhor those. But when we look at the fraud issue today, something's got to be done.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there's really no recourse or repercussions for these guys, the bad actors, right? From a broker's standpoint, you find one, you place a freight guard, right? But there's no like legal recourse or anything. That it's just, it's crazy, right? There does need to be some accountability in the industry for sure. I don't know what the solution is, but at some point something's got to give.
I think it's important for all of us to be keeping an eye on FMCSA and the new head of the Department of Transportation. Positive comments about Sean Duffy from OOIDA, from ATA, from TCA, from TIA. That's great to see the industry coming around to an individual as being potentially a good Department of Transportation secretary. The FMCSA has had in its sort of docket for some time now, and I think it will kind of come to fruition in 2025, a fundamental change to how we regulate motor carriers, at least, an abandonment of the MC number, a shift to utilizing only the DOT, probably other changes baked into that are going to prevent or frustrate companies that are trying to jump around, right? You have that multiple sort of corporate entity issue that is resulting in 25 trucking companies out of a single PO box, right, in Tennessee somewhere, constantly scheming against brokerage operations. So I do think we're on the verge of some pretty significant changes, and that can be pretty exciting for the American people, for customers, for shippers, and of course for the transportation companies that are doing the right things today. They'll be the preferred actor tomorrow.
There's also some betting software, new companies coming out that are a little bit more sophisticated. They're helping, at least on the brokerage end. Companies like Highway, we had their CCO on, and they're doing some exciting things. So there's some action being taken, but it's just one of those things, constant struggle.
Yeah. Well, and the Postal Service has responded to that too. So they've incorporated. So any of prospective suppliers out there listening, any of my friends, current suppliers out there listening, I'll remind them that the Postal Service has partnered with both Highway and with a company called Blue Wire, which does sort of a risk assessment score on carriers to vet their network, and also to encourage brokers, particularly within the network, to vet their subcontractors. And while they're not prerequisites, right, it is a reflection of how the Postal Service has continued to modernize, adopting sort of more cutting edge technology, data-driven solutions to both look more knowledgeably at longstanding suppliers, but also to, of course, look to have a good assessment of new suppliers or prospective suppliers as they are trying to get into the network to move the mail.
How many of your, brokers, carriers in the network do you think are, you said you just partnered with Highway and blanking on the other name, Blue Wire,
yeah.
Blue Wire. How many of, the brokerages, trucking companies in your network do you think are utilizing, vetting, because you guys are seeing how well they're vetting their network? Would you say the majority are doing a good job at that, or it's kind of a mixture? Kind of where would you kind of, put that?
It's a dangerous question, Matt.
Because
I'm going to throw somebody. I think it's 50-50, right? I think it's 50-50. I will say this, right? And this is actually a critique of my postal colleagues. Financial and economic forces, plus maybe an over-reliance on the commercial freight market as a benchmark, have resulted in significant downward pressure on the rates they're willing to pay transportation companies to move the mail and packages between postal facilities. So they look to, DAT, they look to that rate per mile in today's incredibly depressed market as a measure for what it should cost for them as the Postal Service to move volume throughout their network. And I think that is one of the biggest drivers and problems today when we think about vetting carriers, right? Because you do have the fraud issue, right? And you have Highway to help address that. And I think Blue Wire also supplements that. But it's also this downward race to the bottom when you think about these carriers out there that is creating a huge amount of incredible issue from a safety, from a security, from a reliability standpoint. $1.60 a mile, $1.50 a mile does not cover the cost of moving things. I had a great conversation with Rebecca Brewster at ATRI, which puts out incredible research on the transportation industry. And we were talking about safety and we're talking about security. And I said, isn't the problem at the end of the day that we're not willing to pay truck drivers a livable wage? At least as owner operators sometimes, or small carriers. And we can't really expect better service, safer service, more secure transportation until we kind of adjust our price to our expectations. You can't, pay cheap and get premium service, right? And so I think the brokers today in the network are doing a decent job vetting, doing a decent job utilizing solutions, but they are under incredible financial pressure to move things for as cheap as possible. And that means even good companies do bad things when they are forced to kind of move that for a really low rate. And, maybe the market helps address that. Maybe we have some of this excess capacity flush out in 2025. Maybe we see rates rebound and things moderate, but we can't ignore safety and security just because rates are low, right? Just as much as we can't take advantage of things when rates are high. But it's that boom bust cycle of transportation that's killing everybody, whether it's a broker, whether it's a carrier, and whether it's the shipper in terms of what are we actually getting for what we pay.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I know we were talking, pre-show about this a little bit, but obviously you were a transportation attorney for OOIDA, and now you're working with a lot of brokerages, and we're just talking about sustainable rates being a big problem, obviously with safety for truck drivers, owner operators, and I know the FMSCA just came out with something else, a new proposed idea for broker transparency, and just kind of curious. You've seen both sides of it now. Obviously, you're working with a lot of brokerages now, and then you were working with OOIDA previously. Just kind of curious your whole thoughts on all that.
So I haven't read the notice of proposed rulemaking yet, Matt. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but I did work with OOIDA on it prior to my coming over to my current role, because they were banging this drum quite heavily or quite loudly, particularly during the COVID years, because it was their perspective that carriers, small trucking companies, owner operators weren't seeing nearly the increase in revenue or in rates that brokerages were experiencing, right? And so the margin was growing, and there was an inequity in that relationship. And I have a lot of sympathy for that, right? I think we do have an issue today with that broker carrier or carrier subcontractor relationship. It's not just a brokerage issue, right? It's that transparency in that contracting subcontracting dynamic. And if as the law is written today, right, from my work on it previously, there is a requirement for transparency. The problem was that there also was, at least with some actors, a habit of retaliation when a owner operator or a small trucking company asked for the rate the broker was receiving versus the amount that they were paying to the sub. And I think that's perverse as well. So, at the same time, however, right, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a market, right? And if a broker is offering you XYZ rate to move, a load between points A and B, if you don't like it, don't take it, right? And I think that's a fair expectation. So I think both sides have got to give a little, right, as much as they take. That's why I love the Broker Carrier Summit. I know that TFAS there is a supporter of that, and we saw that in the run up to the show today. I think that's those kind of dynamics where we're breaking down the sort of distrust and thinking about it from a more partnership-oriented perspective is really valuable. I'll tell you, in the postal network, right, we're experiencing that dynamic ourselves for the first time in history, right? A lot of brokers or non-asset or asset-light based companies have won dedicated contracts. And then they have to go out and find trucking companies to operate that dedicated contract. And often they have turned to the incumbent, who was an asset-based company, maybe had been operating that contract for 15, 20 years, right? And said, hey, listen, we won this. And they might have even won it for a higher price, right? Can you help me service it, right? And what I have been heartened by is at first, the incredible amount of distrust, frustration, and anger, right? You see a new entrant to the market win a contract that you think you've been servicing the heck out of for years, maybe even decades. They win it, maybe they win it for even more. That distrust, that anger, that frustration that originally kind of resonated throughout the Postal Service Surface Transportation Network, over last year in particular, I think has really faded away towards a much more partnership-oriented approach, recognizing that we're all united by a common client, in this case, the Postal Service. We're all united by a common goal, service the American people, and that if we work collaboratively, everyone is going to be able to kind of meet their business needs while also meeting the needs of our customers. So, that's a pretty lawyerly answer, Matt, or at least a politician's answer as to what do I think about broker transparency laws? Because I do sympathize with them, but it does go both ways. And at the end of the day, it's a market that has to be dynamic. Maybe it ultimately goes back to how easy is it to become a motor carrier? And if it wasn't so easy, then only the right kind of people with the right kind of investment and the right thoughts around business development would be in there, and we wouldn't have all these swings in capacity. it's a hydra, right? It's which head of this problem are we going to tackle first?
I think you summarized it real well. I don't think it was too political. I think it was a good answer. But if anyone has any, as we're kind of getting to the end, if anyone's listening and they have any questions they want us to ask that Will and I haven't asked, feel free to put it in the comments.
Yeah, I had some friends of mine who knew I was jumping on this threatened to ask probing questions, and I warned them that that I'll seek retribution afterwards if they try to put me on the spot. But it's always great to interact with the community. I guess that was probably a new thing for you as well, kind of going from working as a transportation attorney with OOIDA to going to what you're doing now. You got to meet, I'm sure, a lot of your partners and form a lot of new relationships in your new role, which I imagine has been fun. I mean, it's the best, right? As a lawyer, often we find ourselves working on issues that are pretty abstract, right? And while you know what that's going to do for your individual client, it's harder to kind of wrap your hands around what that means day to day for the American people, or what that means for an entire industry. And maybe I'm biased, right? But I did constitutional litigation, right? So if anyone could appreciate the value of their work, it should have been me. And even at the same time, some of the cases I litigated about economic liberty, about unlocking the potential of entrepreneurs, about striking down anti-competitive barriers to entry, the positive result of that litigation or that appellate process doesn't immediately shoot out across the country and rescue everyone from bad laws and regulations. So there are times in that job where I grew frustrated, right? Because you thought you had a victory, and yet the person in the neighboring town is still suffering under the same conditions. Or in the worst case scenario, you lost the case and you reaffirmed bad precedent that now will allow that anti-competitive, that arbitrary regulation to be even more firmly entrenched. So when I came over here to transportation and got a chance to work on transportation issues as a lawyer, and now work on transportation from a sort of strategic and policy-based perspective, it gave me something concrete to understand, right? Because now, again, you two know this well, this audience knows this well, but from anyone from the outside coming in, underappreciation of truck drivers, of transportation companies is like a national hobby, right? Like, we complain about them, right? We denigrate them, we malign them, we have terrible stereotypes about them, right? In reality, they're heroes, right? They're like heroes of like the nostalgic, American cowboy out west, right? That's who they are. They're making things work for us as a country. So working with these companies, whether they're big and publicly traded or privately held or small or logistics, is so much fun. I'm jealous that you guys get to talk about this and work on this stuff and meet an even wider community than I work with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the Broker Carrier Summit. I went to that. It was an amazing conference. We had Dan Lindsay on recently on the podcast to talk about it. So it's a small world for sure.
And he's doing, that's the yeoman's work right there, right? That's the stuff that is really worth highlighting. The other thing that I love highlighting about the transportation industry is how much the people in the transportation industry, whether they're truck drivers, trucking companies, or logistics companies, how much they care and give back to their local community. I think that it's very easy to brush with to paint the picture of the world and of our country with a really broad brushstroke and overgeneralize things. But I do think it's fair to generalize that people in transportation, regardless of their actual backgrounds, they tend to be more salt of the earth, and they kind of understand the day-to-day world that people live in. I have family in high finance. They do not understand the day-to-day world of people, right? They're good people, right? But they're not living my life, your life. They're not living the person in a more rural community's life. Transportation people get that better, and they give back in a way that I think gets undershared, underappreciated. So I know, Will mentioned the BitFreighter conference, or not conference, but BitFreighter charitable event that I spoke at earlier this year. And that's an incredible event, an incredible cause, but that's happening all over the nation. People in transportation are just charitable people. And that's a fun aspect of this community too.
Yeah, 100%. I got to think that a lot of it is simply due to the fact that the wide range of people that you meet in transportation. I guess purely from the brokerage standpoint, we work with all kinds of companies in all regions. We develop these relationships, right? So you get to experience a wide spectrum of people, and it kind of opens up your perspective to how you see the world and just people in general.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the truck driving's hard. Right.
Yeah.
I think some people look back historically before deregulation and say truck driving was a better career then. And that might be a very fair assessment. But also it wasn't dynamic, now increasingly data driven, efficient transportation network we have today that allows us to get things next day and get it for cheaply next day. Right. So truck driving has become a really hard career, and transportation people see that. They see that in a way in which a lot of other industries don't. They don't see a vital role to their success being as hard as it is for a truck driver, so there's a greater degree of appreciation. That also means we have to do more to work collaboratively, right? And I think that kind of goes back to the questions about broker transparency. It goes back to the issues of fraud. It goes back to the issues of safety. Right? If we worked more collaboratively and thought less of our career, our day-to-day as transactional, as if we're extracting value out of a human, like they're a mine in the ground, or as if we're extracting value out of a shipper, or a shipper's extracting value out of a transportation supplier, and think about it more over a long-term and collaborative sort of time horizon, we'll do better for all of us. Podcasts are a great tool for spreading that message and kind of unlocking some of the things going on in the industry. So I really appreciate what you two are doing.
Yeah, we appreciate you having us on. It was a fun episode, and time flew by fast. I know you have a commitment coming up in about 7 minutes, so we don't want to keep you too long. It was a fun conversation. The hour flew by, and I learned a lot. I'm sure Will did too.
Yeah, me as well. Thanks, Greg.
It's my pleasure, guys. Anytime, and keep up the fantastic work.
Thanks, Greg.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.
Bye. That was fun.
Yeah, man. I learned a lot of stuff that I'm just ignorant to, didn't know anything about.
Yeah, I didn't either. I didn't really think about, we use the post office all the time, but kind of the inner workings of it. It's a very unique, side of the transportation, and the amount too. What did he say? They were the largest contract, $5 billion. And it's 99% is done by outside carriers, 99.9, I think he said.
Yeah, man. And just everything that goes into it. You think about servicing middle of nowhere Alaska the same as New York City for the same price. He's got his hands full, no doubt.
Well, shout out again to our sponsors, Multi-Service Fuel Card, been around since 1978. Great discounts. You could be a broker or a carrier. Obviously, carriers use it directly, but brokers can get their own fuel card as well. Jessica, Patricia, great people over there. Black Box, where Will works, HG Ships. We're Will's company, Black Box, HG Ships, where I recruit agents for. Loadbase, great tracking software. Stan, I want to say like Stan the man, comes to mind, but he really is a cool guy. And great software. He has experience in the industry too. He was a dispatcher previously, so he's not, just coming in here with kind of no knowledge of logistics. He built a product, that he saw a fit for. If you're looking at tracking, highly recommend, reaching out to him. Sales Dash, Will uses them. We've both met Josh in person. It's a friend of ours, great person, great product, freight specific CRM. Then our banner sponsor, brought to you by Taft's, top 10 factoring company. Ryan, Rob, all those guys, great people over there. You've probably seen their names sponsoring the Broker Carrier Summit. Some other Kansas City-based company, great rates, and our banner sponsor, and we're happy to have them.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for episode 34. We'll be back at it next week. Safe travels, Matt. I know that you're going to Colombia.
Yeah. I'll be. Our next podcast episode, I'll be in a different country, so that'll be my background will be changing from a hotel room to who knows where, an office in Colombia.
2 dogs are going international. All right. Well, yeah, stay tuned to the pages. We'll be announcing the next guest and Dog of the Week tomorrow.
All right. Sounds good. Have a good one.
All right. You as well.